I am joined by the Honorable Councilmember Dennis B. Zide. I'm Mitchell Englander, Chairman of the committee, and welcome this morning. We've got a couple items on consent. Before we dive into that, it doesn't appear that we're going to have a full quorum of the committee. Under the Brown Act, we cannot legally satisfy public comment, as you all know, without a quorum, and everything will be a recommendation from the Chairman of the committee to the full City Council. Therefore, public comment, if you filled out a public comment card, we'll go ahead and hold your comment card and if we have a quorum, we'll reopen that item back up or public comment, and if not, we'll note that you filled out a card for the file as well. With that, as we've done consistently and have always done in public safety and every other committee that has always been done that way, we're just following the rules and the laws of the Brown Act. But with that, I do appreciate you all coming, but we will hear items and we will have testimony from the departments on various items as well. With that, we've got two items for consent, item 2 and 3. So if you're here on item 2 or 3, I appreciate you coming. And thank you. We'll go ahead and move those as recommended.
Committee members, good morning. John White, City Clerk. Items 2 and 3 both have CAO reports that were submitted after the publication of the agenda. Do you wish to approve those CAO reports with your action on 2 and 3?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Item 1, I just have a quick question of the CAO.
Item 1, CAO report relative to reallocating fiscal year 2009 Urban Areas Security Initiative grant funds, amending a contract with the City of Vernon and related actions.
There's a portion of these grant funds, I believe, that were transferred over from the unappropriated balance. Is that correct?
Yes.
And therefore, as we receive these back, these were from 2009 UASI, and therefore, if it were going back to the UB, that year, fiscal year is already closed out. Would it be more appropriate to recommend that it go to the budget stabilization or the reserve?
Well, it's typically a general fund receipt. I don't think we took a look at it from the perspective of putting it back into the budget stabilization fund, but we could report back before council on that.
If we could do that and look at putting it back into budget stabilization rather than the UB, since the UB's we've closed out that fiscal year and as well as already passed next fiscal 13-14 year. Mm-hmm. It might be more appropriate. If that recommendation could come to council. Sure. And if it doesn't work out in that case and can't do that, then let us know.
Exactly. Yeah, no problem.
Perfect.
I'm Ed Rose with the CAO's office. Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much.
So did you want to approve the report with that amendment, or did you want to modify it in council?
No, with an amendment that the CAO will report back at council.
Very good.
If it would be more appropriate to put that
Thank you.
those funds into the budget stabilization or the reserve rather than the unappropriated balance. Be the action of this committee. Thank you. We'll go ahead and move item 6 on consent as well, but I'm going to bifurcate that if we could with a recommendation from Mr. Zine. And the bifurcation on that will be the helicopter that we pull that item out to report back on maintenance and condition and what would be required and cost. Sort of the analogy of getting a free horse, but you've got to pay the vet bills. So we'll go ahead and look at that. Maintenance and liability. As well as liability as well. Maintenance, liability, and its current condition. Is that okay? So that'll be the action of this committee as well.
Okay.
And we'll go ahead and hear items then in this order if we could, because we do have folks here on items 5 from the airport. So we'll hear items 5 and then items 4, 7, and 8, and then the special one.
Item 5, Board of Police Commissioners report relative to a memorandum of agreement for payment by the Los Angeles World Airports Police Department to the Los Angeles Police Department for psychological referrals, consultation, and training provided by LAPD's Behavioral Science Services Division.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Morning.
Good morning. Pat Gannon, Airport Police Chief.
Arif Ali Khan, LAWA Deputy Executive Director for Homeland Security.
Dr. Kevin Jablonski, LAPD Chief Psychologist.
Morning. Thank you very much. Mr. Zine, did you have any questions on this one?
I didn't know that they were doing this. How long has this been taking place?
If you could use the mic as well,
Thank you.
because I know there's probably tens of thousands of folks listening.
Millions,
I wanna make sure
millions
they
out
hear.
there in the radio audience.
Comment,
Thank you.
Mr. Zine.
The relationship between the psychological services of police, the City of Los Angeles Police Department, Airport, LAWA, how long has that been going on?
It's actually a fairly recent development. If I could just give a little context, when I joined LAWA in the end of 2011, I discovered that there was no formal relationship with LAPD for providing psychological services, either as a referral for a disciplinary matter or if an officer, whether a police officer or a security officer, was in need of help and came forward. LAPD has always been a strong supporter of this, and we've always had an informal arrangement. For example, if there was an officer-involved shooting or there was some in-custody death, or I'm sorry, a police officer who was killed in the line of duty, and that support. And I believe that was provided back in 2005 when Tommy Scott was killed. But we believe that there was a need for a formal relationship, also making sure LAPD was reimbursed for their provision of services, and that we also had a program similar to what LAPD does to intervene and prevent any help the police officers first and foremost, but also recognize that there is a risk management benefit here by intervening when there is a sign of a police officer due to the demands and stresses of the job who may need help, whether it's with depression, things that go on in life, or something more serious.
A new chief?
And then, of course, when Chief Gannon came in, he was very supportive of this, especially with his experience with the LAPD. And I should just also mention Assistant Chief Mike Himes, who is the Chief of Operations at the Airport Police, who joined a few years ago, has been pushing to do this for some time. He is actually has a PhD in psychology and has led a lot of efforts in the state of California to push these types of services for law enforcement officers throughout the state.
No, I think it's a great program. I didn't know that they didn't have anything formal in place. I know the LAPD's had it for many, many years.
Yes.
Dr. B.B. Jacobson, do you remember her?
I sure do.
Yeah, I think she was one of the pioneers. But there was
Riser,
he was the pioneer.
Jacobson, Glasser.
Are those folks still around?
They're still alive. they're no longer with LAPD.
No, okay. No, I know that they were pioneers in this, and it started to spread throughout the country. I think it's a great program when an officer does have an issue of concern. I know when they had the memorial run, an officer passed away during that run, which was obviously tragic, which impacts everyone when you're doing a run in remembrance of an officer who gets killed in the line of duty, and then an officer dies of a heart attack. Was it a heart attack, Chief?
It ended up being a heart condition, yes, of some sort.
And then everybody sees this, and it obviously
Right.
has this negative effect on, when am I next, and the consequences of that. So
And BSS jumped in right away on that and came in, provided services when he passed away that evening and for the next week. Dr. Jablonski and his crew were great about doing those types of things. And even though the airport has an employee assistance program that helps employees, the uniqueness of law enforcement and the pressures, as Director Alican said, to law enforcement needs this specific service that BSS provides. So we're incredibly grateful to Dr. Jablonski and his crew.
And the other question on the rates, are those rates what we would normally receive for compensation?
In
The hourly rates that they're applying here?
No, those rates, those are the standard reimbursement rates with overhead included in them.
Okay. I think it's great that we have that relationship with the airport police, because whether it's airport police, LAPD, sheriff's, highway patrol, whatever, law enforcement's law enforcement, and they obviously need to have those support functions in place. So I think it's great.
And if I could just add, Dr. Jablonski and his staff have been excellent even before we finalized the agreement, coming to the airport, meeting with staff, with both civilian and sworn, understanding the airport environment and what the program, how the program could be tailored to the needs of the airport police.
This will strictly be for the airport police personnel. It won't apply to the other airport.
It'll apply to the 1,100 employees of airport Police Division. So whether they're here, LAX, or at LAX, Van Nuys, or Ontario.
But if just the airport police function, not the other employees at the airport?
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
Well, this is a fantastic program, and I've seen directly the results and the successes, particularly as it relates to a 35-year officer who's also served 12 years as a council member in anger management and psychological services to be beneficial to the city of LA. And we've all, had the benefit directly of working alongside this individual who shall not be named.
You want to approve this item?
One of the questions is, it does say in the report that there's been an increase in the disciplinary cases. What kind of numbers are we looking at?
I think, and Dr. Jablonski can to speak this a little bit more about the report that was generated by the police division, or by the police department for the commission. It's a very small number. The issue that we found once we did the analysis, as I mentioned, discovering, first of all, there wasn't a program, and then, of course, wanting to dive into it to find out what are the issues. We have very few of these concerns, but however, we also saw that there was a connection between some of these issues and what resulted in disciplinary action. And I think that's what that is referring to, that we see that connection. And obviously from a risk management perspective, if we can prevent something that results in disciplinary action, whether it be just a negative comment card or ultimately termination, we want to intervene. So this is certainly not any sort of broad, widespread issue, but in those where we see that have led to disciplinary actions, we saw them related to issues that we think could be prevented by implementing this program.
Terrific.
I also agree. In the short time that I've been there, in the 7 months that I've been there, I've reviewed every one of our internal affairs cases and briefed on them biweekly. And we do have those issues, just like we had the issues when I was with the Los Angeles Police Department, but not in any greater degree than I am used to. The problem has been we just didn't have the same type of services, and this goes to address those issues. Are there alcoholism in law enforcement? Absolutely.
Sure.
The same issues that drive it in regular society drive it through law enforcement also. So.
Certainly. And is this through a 12-step program as well? Is that, and is there a 12-step program for specifically for police officers?
Within the LAPD, we actually have 2 individuals who are open about being in recovery. They're sworn, and they constitute Addiction Prevention Unit, APU, under Behavioral Sciences. They use a whole gambit of resources. So they are actually, we were able to get them specialized training so that they are counselors in alcohol and other addictions, so they might intervene directly. We might intervene psychologically with therapy with these folks. We will certainly use inpatient programs if that's what's appropriate, and if somebody has a less significant level of addiction, then we will use 12-step programs, or typically police officer fellowship, because that's a 12-step program that is reserved for those in law enforcement and other first responders.
Okay, good to know. And I bring that up only because I am sort of an expert on some of this, where I served as a state bar commissioner. And when I was on the commission, we created a program called LAP, which is the Lawyer Assistance Program. And it was something that was spearheaded at the time by John Burton. I was appointed at the time by the Speaker, by Hertzberg, when he was Speaker. And we created this program and coupled that and mirrored with a program called the Other Bar. And the Other Bar, which was a 12-step program for lawyers. And they are one of the highest rates of alcoholism, only second to doctors and those in physicians. Only third to 35 years serving and 12 years, no. And it's been
public safety meeting, Mike.
Your last public safety. That's why I'm drawing you and giving you a hard time. And I'm gonna dedicate this meeting to Mr. Zine at the end of it, which is I've got a long speech to make prior to engaging in that, but I've got to at least tee it up for a little bit of a roast. But I've seen the successes of that program tremendously, and it's been an incredible opportunity to work with the commission and create that and help so many professionals throughout California. It'd be great now to expand those opportunities for law enforcement here And so I really appreciate your efforts. We support this. We'll go ahead and move it on to council. And thank you for coming here this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, with that, that should take us to item 4.
Item 4, Board of Police Commissioners report relative to the 2012-13 Post-Release Supervised Persons Program Grant Award in the amount of $2,288,934.66 from the Board of State and Community Corrections through the City of Gardena for the period May 1st, 2013 through December 31st, 2013.
Great, excellent. Thank you very much. Just a couple questions on this. Let's see here. Same question first on the reimbursement to the unappropriated balance to the CAO on the $1 million. So if we can look back at that same issue that we brought up on item 1. But on this, before it comes to council, whether it would be more appropriate to go back to, again, UB since we've closed our books out for year end, or if it would be appropriate then to transfer that to either the reserve or the budget stabilization fund.
Okay.
Okay.
This was, I know with the initial $1 million, when they came to budget and finance, it's because we were appropriating it from the UB, so we were going to reimburse it. And
Right.
I'll also follow up with them to see if the money, if we're going to expect it before the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, so yeah, in the interest of consistency. And then if it doesn't come even before the end of the fiscal year, then perhaps it should then, report should be the recommendation that it goes back to budget stabilization and or reserve. Okay. And then with that, some other technical questions that I had on the reimbursement for realignment. What's the, are we looking at here a full cost recovery on what we've spent? Is this a percentage of what we spent? Do we know what we've spent?
Good morning, Councilman. Good morning, everybody. Bill Hart, Captain at LAPD's Gang and Narcotics Division. I don't know exactly the answer to your question, Councilman, but I'm sure that this is not a full reimbursement of everything we've spent related to AB 109. This is a drop in the bucket, frankly. We have about 130 personnel on LAPD devoted almost exclusively to enforcement of AB 109 and monitoring post-release supervised persons. So I'm sure that $2.3 million is only a fraction of what we've spent.
Are the 130 personnel a net increase over, I mean, there's always been some function within the department of those who are released. Is the 130 just related to AB 109?
Well, they may look for, or they may deal with other ex-offenders, but the creation of, my boss is joining me here.
Yes, Chief. Thank you.
Coming in for reinforcements.
The
Big
creation
dog at the table now.
of these parole compliance units at every station coincided with the enactment of AB 109. We never had units devoted exclusively to that function before.
Do we have any idea in terms of total cost of those 130 personnel, as well as out-of-pocket and equipment, and I mean some type of analysis of what we're spending right now because of AB 109?
Councilmember, we certainly, in terms of the costs associated with the people that have been committed to parolee compliance for AB 109, could provide that information. We would work with Fiscal Operations Division and give you an exact number in terms of the costs associated from inception, which was October 1, 2011, to present, and quite honestly could forecast into the upcoming year as well. We don't have that with us at the moment in terms of the costs associated. As you recall, this was when AB 109 occurred back in October of 11. It was Chief Beck's intention to get in ahead of this to ensure that we didn't lose ground in terms of crime reduction, that we maintained public safety, and that the individuals that were out post-supervised release knew that there was going to be accountability, support, in terms of getting back integrated into the community, but at the same time accountability. So this was an effort on the department's part to get out in front of it. And we've never been, this has come out of our hide. This is not something that this $2.3 million will reimburse, not even close, as Captain Hart said. This is a small fraction of what the cost would be.
Okay. So I'd like to request, I'll go ahead and move this, and I want to hear from Mr. Zine if he's got questions on this as well, but I'd like to request that it come back to this committee as well as Budget and Finance, a full analysis and report on costs as it pertains to LAPD and AB 109. I think there may be some opportunities that we should look at and utilize to go after the state of California for reimbursements, additional reimbursements, not grants, but we've got to do something to make a statement that this is not only costing us in terms of out-of-pocket costs and possible crime increases, but the resources. So personnel, what they're assigned to, what they're doing, the full cost of those personnel and those bodies as it relates to 109, including but not limited to the equipment and other costs related to those functions and positions. We've got to start looking at ways to utilize and share that information, particularly as it pertains to, on July 1st, we're going to have some of the new council members coming that are coming directly out of Sacramento, including the budget chair from the Assembly who'll be serving in the City Council as well. And so perhaps they can work with us once we look at those numbers and figure out how to go back to Sacramento to get some of those dollars back to the City of Los Angeles, because we are spending a lot of resources, and I think it's important and it behooves us, and we've got a fiduciary responsibility to look at those and analyze that. I think also to complement the department on, and particularly Chief, all of your efforts and what you've done to get in front of this issue, to assign personnel, not just point fingers, but say this is coming no matter what. We've got to be proactive and not reactive. We've got to maintain the crime stats as they've been the lowest we've seen in approximately 40 years. And with all these, I think the numbers are roughly, from what I've heard, up to 9,000 inmates that have been released here in the region or here locally under AB 109. Is that accurate?
I think it's about 4,400 into the city of LA. Is that correct, Bill?
In the city, right.
In the city of LA, but in the region it's been about 9,000.
Yes, in the county of Los Angeles, that would be correct, council member. For our city, about 4,400.
Yeah, about half of those. And so, and then once we have that report back, we can also look at what is the county doing and how do we join forces with them to go to Sacramento and ensure we're getting some of those dollars back, because we're not now. We're taking on the responsibility. So, Mr. Zine.
Thank you. The 130 officers, those are officers in the 21 divisions are assigned to this type of function full-time? You mentioned
Yes.
130, so it's a full-time responsibility to follow up on the individuals being released on 109?
That's their primary responsibility, Councilman. They may be assigned other duties by their CO at times, but primarily they are dedicated to supervising or monitoring the post-release supervised persons.
So it's not ancillary duty, it's a primary duty
Right.
that they've given these officers. And the type of compliance, I've read a lot of articles regarding the compliance or lack of compliance when they are released under 109. The address they give is fictitious, they can't locate them, and then the arrest numbers, how many of them are rearrested and then go back into the criminal justice system. Do you have that information?
I certainly can get that information. I really didn't come with that today.
I think it's interesting that the people understand that these people are going to prison, and by the time you go to prison, you've committed a number of crimes, you've been arrested a few times, you've gone through the system, and then ultimately you end up going to prison. We're not talking about county jail, we're talking about prison. And then you come out under this 109, and it seems that the numbers, say the lack of respect for the law, continues, and the problems continue when the crime, and then eventually they look to the police department and say, what are you going to do about it? When people are going to prison, they've obviously gone through the criminal justice system a number of times, and it takes a number of times of arrest before you end up getting incarcerated, which we've seen the continuing saga So I got some real concerns about how 109's been put into place in the state, the issues, the articles that I read, but then how it impacts the police department. When you have 4,400 in LA City, and know we're surrounded by many other cities. You walk across the street, you're in another jurisdiction. So 9,000 potential in the city of LA, and then all these potential victims, and how this $2 million is going to have not even a dent on what the department needs to do to keep those crime stats down and protect life and property.
Well, let me try this. Just to go back to the earlier question, Council Member, without the exact numbers, I will tell you this. As you mentioned, each of the 21 police stations has a parolee compliance function. In addition to that, Captain Hart has 10 officers assigned to absconders at gang and narcotics. I'll tell you that everyone that comes out that we can follow up on has been followed up on. Those that give false information at the hub when they first are released from prison and are identified as absconders, Bill's people try to search them down and ensure accountability. And so that was the reason Chief Beck wanted to get out in front of it, so that folks knew that we were going to be paying attention within the city to what was going on. And of course, at the same time, I need to say this, probation has been very cooperative with us. We have a full-time probation officer assigned to each of the 4 geographic bureaus and 1 assigned to gang and narcotics. We have 5 full-time probation officers that are working side by side, hand in hand on this function in terms of compliance checks, flash incarcerations, revocations, and all the other processes associated with AB 109.
And I might just add, Councilman, that I think it's important to point out that these 43 or 4,400 people would have been coming out of prison anyway. They would have been out on parole, and instead now they're out on post-release community supervision. The difference really is who's supervising them. And as Chief Albany said, Chief Beck decided early on that the police department should play a role in that. But it's really the same population of people who would have been released and been under the supervision of a parole agent, and now we're working with probation to assist them on monitoring their progress.
And the number of folks that get rearrested because of another crime, those numbers reflect the story also.
You know, it's a little too early, I think, to draw a conclusion about that. I was at a meeting yesterday of the parole realignment team, which is a county. I was representing the department, but it's made up mostly of county agencies, parole or probation, the sheriff's department, and that very question came up about the definition of recidivism. We haven't even really arrived at a definition that everybody agrees upon, because this is somewhat different than when people were released on parole. Probation has a number of intermediate sanctions that they employ rather than just sending people straight back to prison. And so there's a little bit of disagreement about what is a recidivist event. That's still being worked out, and I think they're looking at examining this at the 36-month mark, and we're only halfway there. So I think it's a little early to draw a conclusion about which is better.
One thing is, though, just in looking at the way this has been agendized as well, we've got to be careful not to talk specifically or directly just about AB 109. What I'd like to do as well, though, is ensure that some of Councilmember Zine's questions come back in that report as well, so we can have more of a comprehensive and not just cost analysis of the effects. And if we could do that in the report, how long would you think we can come back with that kind of report in detail? What's reasonable?
30 days?
30 days?
Yeah.
Why don't we want to make sure it includes everything that we're talking about here. We're in June. 30 days would put us right after the recess. That's probably end of July would be reasonable.
Council recess is July 5th through the 19th.
Yeah.
So 30-day report back will put you right in the middle of that recess. If you want to go for 45 days, that will come in.
45 days would be great. So we'll go ahead and do that for 45 days.
The other question on sworn overtime account, will that be then distributed department-wide? because they're talking about $1.2 million. Would that go to each division? How's that going to work?
What we've contemplated is dividing it up between the bureaus based on the population of PSPs residing in each bureau.
And they will
I
divvy
believe-
it out between, the bureaus will then figure it out.
The bureaus would figure it out, and they would be ultimately responsible for the nuts and bolts of how they're going to spend this money and what operations they'll undertake and how frequently. But generally, it'll be to do the same things we're doing now, compliance checks and go after absconders, but with more resources and the ability to do it on overtime, which means nights and weekends and some other times when we typically haven't been able to find people. This will be a great opportunity to work some off hours and see if we can locate them that way.
And does fugitive warrant detail work this particular function, or is that separate?
The parolee at large squad, which is what we refer to, the 10 officers that the chief referenced, they are part of fugitive warrant section. And I should mention, we have asked that 3% of this money go to Gang and Narcotics Division to assist the parolee at large squad, and we would include other people within fugitive warrant section. In other words, we do more than just have those 10 officers on overtime. We would involve other people within fugitive warrant section to go after the people that have been hard to find up until this point.
Okay, thank you.
Very well. Okay, we'll go ahead and move this item as with the recommended change of the reimbursement to the either the reserve and or budget stabilization fund. I'll check with the CEO's office back prior to council on that, as well as the request for the report backs to come back in 45 days. Thank you, gentlemen, very much.
you.
Really appreciate the information.
Next item is item 7.
Yes.
Communication from the City Attorney and Ordinance amending Chapter 10 of Article 3 of the LAMC to clarify that auto park operators' noncompliance with audit procedures is grounds for disciplinary action, and to require that certain operators install automated and approved revenue control equipment.
Morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Thank you for your patience. We've got some revisions here based on what the Commission has adopted, rules, regulations for approved revenue control. I've got a request here as well from the Executive Director on some verbiage change. And if you can just give us a quick Reader's Digest update. I think we've been through this several times already, and I think we're almost there, which is great, because this is an issue critically important where these parking operators have failed to pay the city tens of millions of dollars. There has not been an opportunity to crack down on them. There has not been an opportunity to have required an additional enforcement. Mr. Zine has been a champion and a leader in promoting and presenting this to the public as well as the city. In fact, he and I went out together, as we're both LAPD reserve officers now, and went on a detail making sure that we go after some of these crooked operators, and also doing a lot of observation and what is really out there. And it's a hodgepodge of different crooks that are out there operating some of these facilities that aren't permitted, don't have any of the regulations in place, certainly aren't paying the parking occupancy tax, aren't even licensed per se. And then we've had operators owing the city millions of dollars and just simply restarting up at the same location under a different name or transferring the ownership to one of their relatives. And this is going to solve all of that, is what I understand, and that's what we're here to do.
Good morning. Pejman Shamtub, Deputy City Attorney. The primary changes were in subsection L. The ordinance has been amended to provide the Commission the discretion to adopt rules and to base the type of revenue control equipment based on the nature of each lot. as the council members noticed when they were on their patrol, different lots have different sizes, different accessibilities, different reasons why your temporary or permanent handheld versus permanent revenue control equipment would be relevant. Beyond that, I think that the ordinance pretty much remains unchanged from the last time this committee reviewed it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Zine.
Well, one of the issues that I've noticed is the prices seem to change. You go buy a lot in the morning, and it may be $10. You go in the afternoon, it's $25. You go to the Staples event, you get there a couple hours early, it's $15. Closer to the game, it's $30. How do we, because the 10% based upon the dollar they're collecting, and we know most of this is in cash, how do we cover that aspect when we're talking about some uniformity with this process? And some lots are larger, some lots are smaller. We know clearly that when you've got cash transactions, and Mr. Tiefenk knows this from his experience as executive director, the city is being cheated by a lot of money that people are collecting. They're supposed to pass it through, and they're not. How do we cover that aspect in addition to all these other? We need to have some kind of a standardization. And you mentioned in your comments the individual. We somehow, in some cities I've seen, they've got certain vests, certain identification. We're talking about ID tags that have to be registered, et cetera. How do we cover that within this ordinance that we're talking about?
Well, I'll just point out one point in the subsection L is that it does require that the revenue control equipment accept credit card payments.
I know, but the fact is when they're changing their price
Right.
from 1 hour to another, like if you get in there, I mean, the prices they're not standard prices. You go to a gas station and they'll change the prices, but that's all regulated. With this, it's up to that individual who's running that lot to decide. The lot's getting full, let's increase the price. The lot's not full, let's lower the price. I mean, it fluctuates like a thermometer. How do we come up with something that we will make sure the city gets the 10% they're supposed to receive based upon what that lot is collecting?
Richard,
Your revenue control
Executive
devices.
Director of the Police Commission. The current ordinance allows an operator to vary the pricing that they charge. However, they must notice the Board of Police Commissioners of the variation in pricing. The way I understand that works, and this is more finance's expertise, is we have the record on file. When finance would do their auditing, the operator would have to show what prices they charge during what hours. And it's my understanding from talking with the Office of Finance folks that they're very knowledgeable of those operators who do demand pricing. And when they do their audits of those operators, they're very aware of, as you said, Staples, the lots around Staples. They would have demand pricing, lots in Hollywood. They would vary from the daytime to the evening hours. So when they do their auditing, that's what they're looking for to ensure that that operator is paying the appropriate amount of money.
But when you talk about the revenue collection devices, how do we incorporate that into this revenue collection device that is going to be part of this ordinance?
Well, the operator, as I understand it, if they were required to put revenue control equipment, whether it's permanent equipment or handheld equipment, they program into that device what the price point is for that particular operation. They then generate a check that goes to the individual that pays the money, and they also must keep those receipts. So those receipts would be on file as part of the auditing mechanism that they must keep that check. The operator must, and then present those to the Office of Finance for the completion of their audit. You'll notice in here also that one of the sections indicates that if an operator does not comply with and cooperate with Office of Finance as they complete an audit, that's grounds for revocation or suspension also, and could require installation of revenue control equipment. So that's a strengthening mechanism there to ensure that Office of Finance has the, I think, better tools than they have today to be able to do their audits, to be able to ensure that the operator is paying their 10%.
So the audit is after the fact, and the answer
Yes,
I
sir.
have is that, well,
I would defer to Mr. Lee from
after
Finance.
the fact. when
Robert
they're
Lee, Office of Finance.
When they're collecting that revenue is when we need to collect it, because if they get charged, they close the lot, they walk away, Maybe we claim on the bond, maybe we don't. The fact is, they're ripping off the taxpayers.
Exactly. From the Office of Finance point of view, these are individuals that are collecting money for the city. It's a pass-through. It's a trust. Therefore, it's money that's already owed to the city of Los Angeles.
Right.
We also have the fact that in an audit, when they do audits, like Mr. Tefak referred to, weekends, certain times, the rates go up and down. So the auditors would take samples of certain time periods that they know are going to be higher, certain times they'll be lower, and that will be part of their calculations. However, when we're talking about revenue control equipment, that will level the playing field because the statistics and the revenue and all the numbers will be there. We wouldn't have to rely on their staff giving us their numbers because guess what? It's all computerized, it's all in statistics, and it's not of we guessing what they, not even taking samplings. And because this would be the stats. Regarding the revenue equipment, the process of them going to a revocation, there is the administrative remedy process. They go through hearings. There's a checks and balances.
Well, they drag it out forever is what they do.
And they do try to get out forever. But our point is this. In order for us to do what the city's given us as a mandate and responsibility, we need to be able to look at those numbers. We can't have them come back and, oh, by the way, we're in the hearing process. Here's these gross receipts that we didn't give you through the entire extent of the audit.
Right.
And it, as you know, it cuts down the service. We're dragging back and forth and we're bouncing back and forth. The purpose of this is to negate that. Otherwise, if an entity has 10 locations, and at this point, if there is any liability on any location, then they're out of luck. Until they satisfy the tax liability of that revenue that's supposed to come to us, they're not going to be able to get a renewal or they're not going to be able to pull another permit. In the case of this, it's after the checks and balances, after the hearings, after the administrative remedy process, if we have 10 accounts that are sitting there and they're playing with us on one or two accounts, the fact that they know at the end of this session if they're being revoked or there's any resolution to that point, that they're going to have to put in that resolution revenue control. It's just that we're finished playing with you. You've been doing this with us for several lots. We don't want to go through this again. We don't want to go through the whole process of every time it comes up as a liability to go through another audit or go through the process. This will force them to put the equipment in and for us to be able to know the specific numbers and to give us the printouts, to give us the cost of anything.
Because I know when our chair, Mr. Engler, and I went on patrol for this with the folks from Investigation Division, it was very enlightening how many are not compliant with anything. I mean, it was very, major facilities that you would think would have compliance, total lack of compliance, no permit, no nothing, yet collecting the money. And it was a real eye-opener to see it. And if that's just a sampling of what we saw one night out in the San Fernando Valley, you can imagine how widespread it is when you have 1,900 locations that are listed, and there may be some that aren't listed. So,
and they're always in flux because one entity might take over another location weekly, monthly. And we appreciate all your help regarding the fact that we need to put this on there because that will definitely enforce it. And remember, if it is the 10 lots and we have to drop the revenue control equipment on all of them, so be it. But it's not as if we haven't given them the chance.
Yeah.
The administrative remedy is there. They're going to be dragging through us for a while anyways before we even get there. Ideal situation, they never will get there. But the fact that they know at the end, if you're still going to drag us through this, we're going to hit you with something.
well, they beat the system many times.
Yes, and
If I may, I want to clarify what this is and what this is not. This is not revenue control equipment on all auto parks in the city of Los Angeles.
right, that's very clear.
It is revenue control equipment on those lots that have not had a permit and they've operated. That would be a mandate. And lots that are suspended or revoked and they want to get back into operation.
And suspended or revoked because they were delinquent in
That's correct.
paying the city when this was a
That's correct.
cash-based business, which leads me to the question in Section 3, number L, the conditional reinstatement of a permit or after revocation or suspension. And it reads, if a permittee's permit is revoked or suspended by the board on grounds relating to the delinquent business and parking occupancy taxes, the revoked or suspended permit shall not be reinstated, nor shall any other parking permits be granted or renewed Let's come back to the or renewed. Unless and until the permittee installs and maintains revenue control equipment in accordance with the rules and regulations adopted by the board based on the size, accessibility, nature, and similar factors of each lot. So in other words, if they are found to be delinquent in paying their POT, in going through all the administrative hearings, in being and having then that that process, the outcome, the disposition of that process, be that their permits were suspended or revoked. That revocation has its own process. If they're found that, then their consequence is they shall not operate. They shall not be given another permit. They shall not be renewed unless they have the equipment installed not only on that lot, but all of their lots. It's been suggested, though, that the word or renewed, that statement come out, that the operator shall not be, I'll use the word punished, if you will, punitively to install the equipment if they've cleared up that one particular lot issue, or perhaps they've paid it and then made the decision to no longer operate that lot and abandon it. Perhaps it was a money loser. Perhaps it was being sold. Whatever the case may be, that they shouldn't then be required to install the equipment on the remaining lots. And that suggestion, I'm not sold on. I think having the leverage of requiring them, if they get into a situation where they're not paying the city for, and they've gone through this process, and they've gone through, I mean, they could pay it, and then if there's an issue, they can dispute it after payment. There's no reason for them to withhold payment of their taxes on any lot, period. And if they do that, we should have the ability, even on a renewal, to mandate that they are good operators, and I don't want to take the teeth out of it. And I think particularly those who have multiple lots, I don't see any reason why those, in fact, should be the more reputable operators that should never be in that position. So why would we have the recommendation to remove the words or renewed? And I would suggest we keep it in, but if you could walk me through a
If
good
I could just
argument.
explain the rationale behind that for myself. You have an operator that has 30 lots, and 4 lots become in a situation where they get to a process where they're suspended and revoked. The other 26 lots have been paid. They are not delinquent lots. The way this reads now, those other 26 lots would have to install some version of revenue control equipment. To the max, permanent in-ground equipment, a couple of $100,000. To the least, handheld equipment to several $1,000s. The piece about that I think is concerning when the word shall in the ordinance is that 2 things. One, if Office of Finance enters into a stipulated agreement with that revoked or suspended lot, they cannot waive the shall in that stipulated agreement. So they can get their stipulated agreement on the lots that they owe money on, but they still would have to have revenue control equipment as is currently written for the other 26 lots. That's the first piece.
Does the Office of Finance have the ability to suspend or revoke their permit?
No, sir, we do.
Okay, so if they're working with the Office of Finance and they have an issue where they haven't perhaps through an audit paid enough, or there's an issue where they're in arrears for their parking occupancy tax, they're not in a situation yet then of a suspension or revocation. So if they've ever gotten to that point and it's that bad, I still think that's why I'm just not sold on. I think the shall needs to be in there to have the teeth.
I just want to clarify, there have been situations where a permit has been suspended and revoked, and the Office of Finance has entered into a stipulated agreement on the amount of money owed. That has occurred.
I understand that.
So what that has done is then that would take away the ability for the operator to enter into that stipulated agreement. They would still have to have the revenue control equipment in the other 26 lots.
But what I'm looking at is in the past, we didn't have the ability to ensure we're going to have equipment mandated on the lots for these folks who are not following the rules and regulations and paying their taxes. So the only thing we did have to offer is for Office of Finance to get into stipulated agreements and try to recapture those dollars once they're caught and found. In this case, now, once we have the ability to mandate that they install regulated equipment and control equipment, then these operators should be in fear to never to get into that situation where if there is an issue, perhaps found in an audit where there's money in arrears or they didn't pay enough, or it's found through an audit or somehow that they might have 27 lots and they failed to pay one accidentally, it slipped through the books, whatever happened, it still wouldn't result in either a revocation or suspension through the Office of Finance. They'd still have the ability to work through that process without, because you don't have shall revoke or suspend if they're willing to work out the payment plan, right?
Absolutely, and those situations do occur, but we have had situations.
Because we didn't have this.
No, we always had the ability to suspend or revoke a permit. This adds the permanent revenue control equipment on the other lots.
I think if there's an operator out there that's going to go through this process here on out, that's going to not pay their taxes, that's going to cheat and steal from the residents of the city of Los Angeles, purposely where it would result and lead to revocation or suspension of their permit, they shall install this on all of their lots. That's what I think. But
It's a good deterrent. You know what? It reminds me of the police situation, fruit of the poison tree. You do something wrong in the arrest, all that evidence is then excluded. It's the same kind of situation. You're going to run your shop appropriately, legally. You're collecting money that's supposed to go to the city. That is the tax, the 10% tax that you're collecting for the city, and then you're not turning it over. You've got, it's gone on so long. It's been so abused for such a long period of time. 1,900 lots. We need to get serious with it, and we need to let them know that we're serious about this revenue they're collecting for the taxpayers, that they do it right. And if they don't, there's going to be consequences. That's the bottom line.
I want to assure the committee that nobody is more committed to this than myself and my people. So please rest assured to that.
But you know, they know how to
This is a piece of just the operational side of the permitting of
well,
business.
so here's if you on the flip side, say you've got again as that example of 27 lots that are operated and owned and controlled by one entity, and it was only one lot that they had the issue with. Well, on the flip side is what happens if 26 lots they had an issue with and one lot they didn't, and and we said, well, it wasn't every single one of them. So I think we go ahead and keep it in there the way it's written as now.
One clarification also from the city attorney: is this a retroactive?
I was going to get to that.
Okay.
Okay.
Because that has a big bearing on going forward.
It does, and I was going to get to that as well. What I would be willing to do is we'll move this section as written, section 3.1, or 3L rather, as written and proposed to the City Council. If, though, before it's scheduled and agendized for Council, if you want to meet offline and walk me through some other examples or perhaps give me some information as pertains to particular incidents where it would make sense to strike or renew, I'm willing to listen. I'm just...
Well, I think there's nothing more to say on it.
Okay.
I submit it.
Okay. And then on that, on the retroactive, I very much would like to have the retroactive ability in this if we have the ability to do that under the law. And so I'd ask our city attorney to weigh in on that and give us her expert advice.
Or him.
Or his, I think.
Or his. I was looking to the committee's attorney, but
I think it would be more appropriate
Appropriate?
for the
Okay.
attorney handling the drafting to speak to that.
fantastic.
Just to clarify that I understand the question, are you referring to operators who in the past have already had their permit revoked, and you're saying at this point you would like them to install the revenue control equipment?
And I think that's what we've got to flush out is how many are there? What are they? What were they revoked under? We might be able to carve out those that were what retroactive means. If it's retroactive, I very much would like to have the ability to have retroactive on those who were revoked. Those who were suspended might be another situation. So I just don't know where those line up and how many there are. I think the moving forward part is critically important, but I don't know what's in limbo currently. I don't know what's currently under investigation for, or consideration, I should say, for suspension or revocation.
I could give you, there have been no permits that have been suspended.
Okay.
The revocation of permits, probably a dozen at the most.
And those permits that have been revoked, are they trying to be renewed currently? Any of them?
Some of them are, yes, but they have not been issued as of yet.
What about the ones that have changed the name? The family has just changed names in the family.
That's gone on for years, so I have no idea what the number of those
Well,
individuals.
that should be part of it.
Yeah.
And also to clarify, the current ordinance, Section 103.38, which is the amended language is in our Section 4 in our proposed ordinance, already says that if an operator has had his permit revoked, then at least as it's employed by the Commission now, for those lots, they cannot request new permits for those lots that have been previously revoked for at least a year. Our amended ordinance gives the board the discretion to allow them to have those permits if they comply with the revenue control equipment, if they install the revenue control equipment. So in any case, we've already, in one respect, addressed that issue, that at least for a year, they cannot get the same permits for those same lots back.
For 1 year?
Right.
Yes.
So that lot, no matter what, even if it changes hands, it runs with the land for a year.
It runs with the individual, it's the person, not the particular property. In other words, if I had a lot that was revoked and I walk away and the landlord then wants to lease the lot to another person, that individual is not constrained by the liability that I had.
See, I don't think it goes far enough then.
That-
open it up with another name.
But
Which is what they constantly do.
I mean, the problem is that we can't penalize legally. We cannot penalize the owner of the lot and say that this lot cannot be a parking lot for a year because
I think
the operator.
I think we need to look at it from a land use perspective as well, not just a permit, and I absolutely disagree. I think there's an ability to do that. Contractors do it every day with liens on the property that runs with the land. We do it on planning and land use with all types of conditions and revocations on permits. When we revoke an ABC, for example, an alcohol beverage control license at the property, it doesn't matter if it changes hands or not. If we've got conditions that we set forth because it's a bad operator at a particular location on a land use matter, we have the same ability that it doesn't matter if it changes hands or not. Those conditions run with the land. I don't think we're ready yet. I'd like to see this run with the land. I mean, the whole ability then for them to just simply sign it over to one of their relatives, which is what they constantly do, is an issue. And I think there's an ability. We do it with so many other things. First of all, let me just say that I want to compliment you all on this. I'm by no means saying we're trying to solve for everything, and you can't always do that. But I think we're missing the boat on one very particular matter on this. You've done an incredible job. I know everybody is very anxious to get this done, and we need to. But I'd like to solve for some ability to run it with the land, at least for some period of time. We are able to do that in so many other capacities, and that when they pull the permit, perhaps it's with landlord consent or owner consent, or the owner also has to be a signator on that permit to allow the operation on the land. And I think we've got to look at that and work with our land use attorneys to figure out how to close that gap.
You know, the DEA is doing that now with these buildings that are leased to marijuana dispensaries. The DEA is going after the owner of the property. So if they can do that to close them down, why can't we do that with this?
If I could respond to both of your valid points. First of all, in terms of medical marijuana, when it comes to a public nuisance, there is a different area of law that governs. However, first of all, in terms of addressing, I think the underlying issue is that you don't want, operator A to just change his name to operator B and open up the same lot in the same location. Is my understanding correct?
That's the simplest way to phrase that. But there are a lot of other schemes that go along with that.
I understand. And in order to address that, we do have another ordinance that was recently passed together with the proposed bond that has already been approved by the council that creates a presumption that if another company is formed and is applying for the same type of permits for the same lots, and they have the same directors, same employees, same CEO, then there's a presumption that they are related companies, and the related companies are governed at a higher standard, and they have a presumption that they have to overcome. The issue in terms of the landowners, you also have to remember from a due process point of view, the landowners in our current scheme, in our current ordinance, they're not involved at all in terms of any of the hearings, in terms of the assessment. The landowner is basically leasing their lot to operator A, and they don't get any notice of when an ordinance, when an assessment is assessed, when an audit is conducted, when an administrative hearing is conducted, when Mr. Tiefang's commission revokes the permit or even gives them a hearing considering
Great.
revoking the permit.
No, I got it. Let's change all that. So here's my thinking, if Mr. Zine is okay with this. We just included the owner as a process for the valet ordinance, that they have to sign off on a valet as well. So in other words, if there's 3 owners of a restaurant, as an example, and a valet operator wants to come in and operate, that he has to have consent with all 3, or work something out if it's so you don't get the competitive, 3 people coming in at different price points. And so we worked all that out. I think all we would have to do is make some modifications, again, working with the land use attorneys on having consent, and then they would be part of that due process. They would get the notification if there was some hearing. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars on the table. We're talking about people that have figured out every loophole. These tax scofflaws are, it's like water on cement. They look for the path of least resistance and any crack or crevice to slip through. That's what they're after. And creating any holes or opportunities where we say, well, we can't really do that because the landlord wasn't, or owner of the property wasn't part of the initial agreement or permit. Fine, let's make them part of it. Let's make them sign off on it. Let's close that loophole before we open it up. And so, we're able to do this with other permits and other operators on ABC. If we've got folks that aren't following their conditions, we can revoke their ability under their CUP to operate that facility. We do that not on a regular basis, but we do it when it gets to that point. And so what I'm saying is we're at that point. We've spent a lot of resources and continue to do that. I don't want to be sitting here in a year saying, well, it's not the same CEO and it's not the same, or they're not giving us that information, or it's a sole proprietorship, so it's not a corporation. Then there's no CEO. Then there is no, you don't know who all those employees are. They may not keep those records. And we're just going to be chasing our tail. We need a hook, and the hook is the property. The land's not going away. And so we need to somehow take everything you've done and keep it, because it's fantastic, and add to it some ability to tie it into the property and stop them from bleeding the city of Los Angeles. And so that would be my recommendation. I think we have the ability to work that out. I'd like to see that explored. I think we could probably do it relatively easily, and it won't be very painful.
I don't know why we can't. And if we just for a moment, the Mountain Fire District, you could rent a house.
That's right.
But whoever owns that house is responsible to make sure that brush is cleared, 200-foot radius. They go after the landowner. I don't know why we can't do the same thing here. And I know when it comes to finance, when someone owes $10 million, then they go to the city attorney's office and they pay $3 million and they get off with the $7 million. They make off with it. So this whole thing has been flawed for so many years. Again, it's cheating the taxpayers. It's cheating the city general fund. So you need to hold that property owner responsible. They will then make sure that they're not leasing to someone who's going to be ripping it off, period. Or you say you can't use the lot for the next year. It has to be shut down. There's got to be some teeth, and without teeth, this means nothing.
So I think we're almost there. I think we've got a lot of teeth in this. I think you guys have done a phenomenal job. I'd like to see this come back in 30 days with working with the city attorney's office from a land use perspective on how to tie it to the land. If we need to set up meetings in doing so as we get to that, then so be it. I'm happy to work offline on this as well, but I'm confident that we have the ability to do that and tie these permits to the land itself and the landowners to get them to comply and pay these taxes.
Mr. Chair, if I could just say procedurally, I'm a little hesitant, just because the original council direction is so much different than what this committee's recommendation seems to be. And would it please the chair to perhaps bring a new motion in council that would, because that would involve an impact not only to the ordinances governing the police permit, but also the ordinances governing Office of Finance's parking occupancy tax and getting the landowners involved from the beginning.
I think we can, I don't see any reason why we couldn't wrap it up into the same ordinance, and
You don't want to start over.
and I don't want to start over, and I don't think it requires a new motion, so I'd like it to come back in 30 days. That'll be the request of this committee, with the ability to tie it to the land and come up with a mechanism, whether it is just by simply having a certified letter on file with the landowner saying that they understand these rules and responsibilities, and that these permits will be tied to the land for failure to follow the rules and regulations. The enforcement will run with the land. I don't see why we couldn't simplify and come up with an easy way and not a long, stretched out bureaucratic solution that could take years with another motion. I think you guys have done a lot of work on this already, and I applaud you for it. I think we're almost there. We just want to close that loophole that everybody seems to be taking advantage of. So it'll be, without, I think, further discussion, the request that it come back to this committee in 30 days with that ability.
And just to clarify, is the motion just to have the permits run with the landowner, or also that underlying liability on the Office of Finance side?
Just the permits.
Just
And so that way the enforcement part of it will also run with not the Office of Finance, but just the permitting. That way the enforcement part of it can then also run with the land. So in other words, if they fail to pay and that permit is either suspended or revoked, if they simply change hands, it doesn't matter. The new person coming in to operate at that facility is going to be required to install the equipment as well. And the landlord won't let it happen. Okay, thank you very much. So we'll bring that back in 30 days if we could. Thank you.
Item 8, communication from the City Attorney, an ordinance adding sections 103.203 and 103.203.1 to the LAMC to establish permits for valet parking operators and valet parking attendants. Amending LAMC section 61.07E to authorize Bureau of Street Services investigators to cite for violations of valet parking operator and valet attendant permits, and adding a new permit fee for valet parking operator and attendant police permits.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You guys have done a lot of work on this. I know I've personally drilled down and done a deep dive on every possible question, every step of the way that I could fathom in every scenario where it pertains to what would happen if, a what-if scenario. And every question that I've ever had has been well thought out and answered. I met a friend the other night for dinner on Ventura Boulevard, and he was pulling up his car. I'd already been at the restaurant, the valet operator, and he had a really nice, expensive new car. He throws his keys to the valet operator. He said, "How do you know that guy's licensed?" He goes, "Oh, they're all licensed." I said, "Actually, none of them are." I said, "How do you know that guy even has a driver's license?" He goes, "Well, he's a valet driver." I said, "Yeah, but there's never been a background check. There's no..." He goes, "But I just paid," and his car was a few $100,000 car. I said, "You're kidding me." And I said, "No, we have no idea." It's incredible that we've been living this long in the city of Los Angeles without this. So I want to applaud you, gentlemen, for all the work that you've done. It's been a painful process in going through and working with so many different interest groups on this. It's also, this has been the brainchild originally from our mayor-elect, Eric Garcetti, who's actually put a lot of work into this in his office, needs to be applauded as well. I only had really one simple question. I think it was answered earlier offline, but just for the record on this. Well, two. One is that it pertains to the private residence for those unique special events would be exempt, because we don't believe, it would be up to the homeowner or property owner to verify or hire a licensed company, and we've never had any issues, and so we don't want to get into that. And then number two, though, is that if they are, when they're operating and they're taking over the metered locations, that those meters have some identification or identifying signage or bag, if you will, covering the meter, indicating the hours and days when that operator, the permittee, has been paid for those spots and owns those spots, if you will, letting the general public know that they, in fact, shall not be able to park there and have to utilize that service, and want to ensure that that was, in fact, one of the components of this.
Yes. Good morning, Deputy City Attorney Brian Satelli. In relation to your first question, the private residence, that is covered under 103.203B section of the ordinance, which has an exemption for valet parking operator providing service as a non-recurring special event at a private residence. So that's covered there. As relationship to the second piece dealing with the metered locations, I believe the Department of Transportation has a mechanism in place, having had discussions with them over the past several months on this issue, where either the meter itself would display that it is a valet parking meter for this temporary period of time, or a cover will be placed on the meter, but perhaps the Executive Director could provide some more insight on that.
Richard Tiefank, Executive Director of the Police Commission. In working with Dan Mitchell from Department of Transportation, they have developed guidelines, much as the Board of Police Commissioners has developed guidelines, and the directions responding to all of those kinds of issues, Councilman, are included within their guidelines. So it will either be bagged or there'll be a permanent sign placed to the meter post that would say during these hours it is restricted for valet service only.
It'll be clear in their guidelines that if the bag or the sign is not affixed to that meter, then that meter shall be open for public use?
I would assume that is. I can't speak for them, sir, but I assume, but I will ensure that it is.
Is there anybody here from DOT? No. I haven't seen the guidelines from DOT. I don't think we were shared a copy of that. So what I'll ask then is that that is included with the report to ensure that that they can only use those spots, even if they've paid for them or not, unless if those spots have to have and shall have either a bag covering that meter from the City of LA. It's got to be an LA issued bag and or sign, and it should include those, again, the dates and times of such. My staff, in fact, appears to have the requirements and refused to share them with me earlier from DOT. When on-street spaces are desired for the dropping off, picking up of vehicles for valet parking, the applicant shall submit to LADOT the following information for the regulation of such spaces. Okay, but this doesn't talk about the signage. So it only says that they shall submit. So we want to add that those spaces shall not be used unless there is actually a bag or a sign affixed to each particular space, indicating the days and hours that they were permitted for. So we'll make sure that's part of it.
I'll reach out to Mr. Mitchell and pass that on to him, sir.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure that comes to council with that change.
To the DOT guidelines.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Zine?
No, fine.
All right, thank you very much. This is great work. Appreciate it. Does that take us to the last item in the special?
Special meeting item 1. Board of Police Commissioners report relative to review of claims made for payment of the Christopher Dorner Reward and recommendations for payment of the reward in the total amount of $100,000 to 4 claimants.
Excellent. Thank you, Chief. Thanks for waiting around. Mr. Zine, do you have anything on this?
Chief Albanese, I know that you're concerned about having this payment move forward. It was reviewed by the judge panel. It was gone to the police commission. We're now at the time to say $100,000 needs to be paid to these 3 individuals. It's been broken down to the folks, their participation based upon the judge's ruling. I know there may be a lawsuit or two that contesting the situation. Can you just give us some information, and today asking us to move forward with this $100,000 to take to the council so that payment can be made along with the other dollars that accumulate to the $1 million reward for the Christopher Dorner situation. If you can just go into that, please. And you're here today for that particular matter?
I am council member. Thank you very much. Kirk Albanese, Deputy Chief, Chief of Detectives for the LAPD. As you know, the Dorner event started in early February, and on the 10th of February, following the homicide of the Riverside City police officer and the wounding of his partner, the wounding of an LAPD officer in Corona who was with another officer, both of whom were fired on, the chief, the mayor, and others, representatives from other jurisdictions, announced at a press conference the $1 million reward. Supported by yourself, Councilmember Englander and Buscarino, and that process moved forward. As the process moved forward, it became increasingly important to all of us in the city family that it be viewed by all as being fair. And so the Dorner reward procedures were created. They were posted on the department website in early April. They ran and closed until the 19th of April. Those that chose to apply were able to do so. Those that chose not to didn't. In order to apply, you had to sign a waiver, which is all still public information on the website for the department. The justices, Baird, Marino, and Bonner, all of whom are either retired California Supreme Court or federal judge retirees, met with law enforcement. They listened to all the information from the jurisdictions. We put the fact pattern together for them, and the justices rendered a written recommendation as to how the reward should be administered. And the short of that, council members, is that the two individuals in the cabin will receive 80%. The individual that located Dorner's burning truck will receive 15%, and the tow truck driver who alerted the LAPD officers in the city of Corona will receive 5% for a total of 100% as it relates to the $1 million. There was an effort in Superior Court to halt the payment. Superior Court judge denied that, and the first installment was paid for approximately $350,000. And so this process is moving forward. Now, we have the city that has a $100,000, City of Los Angeles $100,000 reward. We have the County of Riverside that has a $100,000 reward. There's some media as it relates to the County of Riverside this morning. They're nearing completion. And then the County of Los Angeles is in the process of their procedures as it relates to the $100,000 reward. So those three jurisdictions make up $300,000. The other $700,000 are private donors, and it was outlined publicly in the procedures that were posted. That money is in a downtown account tended to by a law firm that has agreed to do so.
Great, thank you.
The issue that we're relating to now is the $100,000 from the City of Los Angeles. Well, the total is $1 million from the different entities. We're talking about the $100,000 from the City of Los Angeles, which will be directed, because normally our maximum is far less than $100,000. That'll come from the general fund provided by the reserve fund. So that's where the money is going to be coming from the city's contribution. And I understand there was one entity that initially pledged and then they declined. There was one entity that pledged money and then there was only one that declined after they made the pledge.
Well, I wouldn't say there was just one. There were a number of people. There is one that stands out in terms of he has legal action pending. His name is Heldebrake.
I'm talking about the reward money, not claims, but the reward money to accumulate the $1 million reward. There was an entity, I thought, that pledged the million to part of that million, then they withdrew.
Oh, yes, that's true.
There's only one that did
No,
that?
there were more than one that initially pledged council member and chose not to follow through.
But we do have, you accumulated all the $1 million.
Yes, and we're working in terms of that piece with the mayor's office who has control of that. The police department does not have control of that money.
Right, okay. So we'd make the recommendation, and I've discussed this with my colleague, the chair, Mr. Englander. I know when I made this motion in council, it was unanimously approved to go forward. This was when the situation was taking place, when a lot of people were in fear, when Christopher Dorner was out on his rampage, obviously causing death and fear for a lot of folks. It was an unusual amount of money that we put up, but it was a very unusual situation that we were facing in this particular jurisdiction. So we'd like to move forward with that, and the process that will take place from this point would then go to the council for their vote, and then for the delivery of the dollars, the delivery of the $100,000.
Thank you. And I couldn't agree more. It's critically important that we pay this money out. And I've been asked by a lot of folks, there's been other people that have withdrew because they said that Dorner committed suicide, and therefore he wasn't technically apprehended or convicted. I couldn't disagree more. I think in the terms of apprehension, he's apprehended. He's done. He's gone. In terms of a conviction, there was no question, there was no reasonable doubt whatsoever that he was the suspect. That was not an issue, not a question in anybody's mind. And we've got to remind the public of what these reward motions are all about. The reward motions aren't a reward because people went through fear. These reward motions aren't put out there with taxpayer dollars because people may have information, but they don't want to share it for other types of reasons. This is an issue. We put these out there, as other jurisdictions do, so we can get tips, so we can get people incentivized to call information in. We lose a lot of credibility if we put it out there and take it back and say, well, you didn't really meet all the criteria and qualifications. I applaud that this process took on a whole new perspective with bringing on retired judges, an independent body, to analyze the 12, I believe there were 12 total claims that came in. These 3 claims that are being paid out to these 4 individuals make sense, and we should move forward with this. And with that, it'll be the recommendation of this committee to send this immediately to the full City Council for approval. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Chief Albanese, thank you for your determination and your persistence on this. And I know you were in charge of a lot of factors in this situation. And I know it's taken a while to come to this point, but the fact is the council was very committed to finding Mr. Dorner, to stopping his rampage, at the same time living up to the word that we made this promise of this reward and following through with that promise reward. And the fact is, it was unusual to get the judges together to review all the facts and circumstances, but I want to commend the department the way they handled this in a very honest fashion, a very forthright fashion. They didn't hide anything. It was out front, and it was very, very focused on how do we do this in a proper fashion and not receive criticism, but say you did it in the right way. So I want to commend you because I know you led that particular issue to have this done and have closure, and I think we're coming to that final point where we'll have closure on this.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no other business before us. We did not have a quorum to satisfy public comment. The public comment cards will be held and noted. Having said that, before we adjourn, I'd like to dedicate this meeting to Councilmember Dennis Zine, as he has been, this is his last official Public Safety Committee meeting of the City Council before he retires and rides off on his Harley into the sunset. But having said that, he has served the city well, not only as an LAPD officer for 35 years, but on the City Council and specifically the Public Safety Committee, always ensuring that this public is safe, because he has dedicated his life to that effort. And it is bittersweet that we know he's got still a full life ahead of him, but losing just an incredible person who's dedicated so much to the citizens and to public safety, and we truly appreciate it. This meeting will now be officially dedicated to Councilman Dennis Zine. We are adjourned.